Before we start,
Yeah.
you realize Foundation came out today?
The movie or the
The
show?
television show on Apple Plus.
No, I did not know that. I fucking love Foundation, the book.
Now is the time to sign up for Apple TV Plus.
I don't want to. I already have so many
Mike's,
things.
there's over 3 hours of Foundation on it right now.
I'm just gonna pirate it. I'm gonna go back to piracy.
Mike, it's like $4.99 a month.
But okay, this is what I have. I've got let's go through. I've got Nintendo.
Okay.
I've got Xbox Game Pass.
Same.
I've got Criterion, which I paid for all at once.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
Netflix.
Yeah.
Spotify.
Yeah.
What else do I have?
Disney Plus,
Disney Plus. Yep, which I have as well, and
which is for me also Hulu and ESPN.
yep, I have Buzzsprout,
Same.
and I have Chicago Tribune. Actually,
Yeah.
I really got to get rid of that. They make it really tough to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, I just use my parents' login because they still get the physical paper. I also have. I'm gonna sign up for Peacock either tonight or tomorrow morning because
Peacock.
my team is playing on Peacock and I don't want to go to the bar tomorrow.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, HBO Max, which I pay
Yeah.
for you, me, a former coworker, and my parents. Trying to think, do I have another? I have more subscription services. There's too many.
Yes, I'm paying.
Yeah, because I got the Apple TV Plus.
I'm certainly paying like $100 a month in subscriptions already.
Prime Video.
Yeah, I don't even have Prime.
You don't have Amazon Prime? Bet you crazy. Welcome to Subject to Blackout. My name is Timo, and with me, as always, is Mike from the Name Taken Podcast. Mike, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Tim. How are you?
I'm doing well. We decided this past week to revisit our Criterion series, and something that struck your fancy that neither one of us had actually ever seen was Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing.
Yep.
So we watched that this week. And Mike, I'll let you start as usual. What were your initial thoughts on your first viewing of Do the Right Thing?
I'm familiar with Spike Lee.
Yeah.
I know Spike Lee as a director. I know Spike Lee as a Knicks fan.
I know him as a patron of Madison Square Garden.
So familiar with Spike Lee. I had never seen this movie, but I have and I've brought this up occasionally, like Roger Ebert reviews. But I have a book of his reviews, and one of his great movies is Do the Right Thing, and I've read his review, where it's partially about the movie itself, and it's also partially about critic reactions to the movie. It's a really interesting review, because Roger Ebert sort of highlighted that the interpretation of the title was also sort of divided among racial lines for critics, which is a really interesting thing to say. And it's also something that Spike Lee has talked about when he sort of reflected on the movie. So yeah, so finally, here we go. We have an opportunity to watch this. It's in the Criterion Collection. It's on Netflix. It's an amazing movie. It's a movie that knows how to. The pacing is great. The characterization is great. It's a movie that knows how to draw you in and make you comfortable before it fucks you up. So most of the movie, you're being introduced to this neighborhood as a character, and I don't think you entirely understand why until shit gets real. But prior to that, it seems really innocent until suddenly it's an incredibly intense movie. So I thought it was great. I was aware of what the movie was about, I wasn't aware of the details so much that I wasn't sort of surprised or shocked at different points. Uh, so I felt as well, to be perfectly honest. I don't know like how far we should go in revealing this, but there's like a particular thing that happens to a character on screen. Uh,
That
and
is timely to say the least.
yeah, and like in the present context of watching this movie, it is sort of like twice horrific. It's sort of like
No pun
directly,
intending, it's arresting.
yeah,
Yeah, it is. When that started to happen, I knew something along the lines of what we're hinting at was going to happen at the end of this film, because this film is basically like talked about as a tragedy of sorts, um in like the classical uh uh sense of the word tragedy, as far as like plays or manuscripts go. um but yeah, seeing it play out exactly that way, and yeah, I mean, we'll get into more detailed spoilers. But yeah, that made the movie feel quite relevant. Almost 30 years on, more than 30 years on.
more unfortunately. That's a thing that is kind of devastating about the message of the movie, is that it is a very timely message, but this was, I think it was 1980. This is 1989, right?
1989, I believe, is when it was released.
Right. So we haven't even gotten to the LA riots at this
Yeah, I
point.
mean, Rodney King wasn't even a thing.
Right. But there were a number of other, and this was something else that I thought was especially tragic watching this movie, is at certain points, characters, or at a particular point, characters bring up names of other people. And I looked up a bunch of them, and these are all George Floyd's, Breonna Taylor's from the 80s that
Yeah.
we've completely forgotten about, but were clearly very significant at the moment.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of things that are kind of devastating. Uh, but it's a movie too where, just to bring it back around and also to hand it off, that I love a movie where it starts out one way and then there's like a psych and it actually intended to do something completely different. One of the things that I think about is like Parasite. It starts out as one particular movie and it shifts into something completely different. This is one of those movies. It starts out kind of like lighthearted, comedic, as kind of like this character study where the character is the neighborhood, but then it becomes something else.
Yeah, it definitely pivots there. I also have some history with Spike Lee movies, having not seen this one. And my history of Spike Lee movies is that I really like some of them, and I really feel like Spike Lee gets in his own way with some of the other ones. So,
Yeah, sure.
for instance, uh, Black Klansman,
Mhm.
which came out, I believe, a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, maybe. I feel like Spike Lee uh, didn't make that a Spike Lee movie. I mean, when you think of stereotypical Spike Lee movies, this is the movie you think of. The
Yes.
fisheye lens close ups, the wide angle lens close ups, um, real bright, saturated colors, your yellows, your reds, really pop on screen.
And a lot of the same actors too,
Yeah.
including Spike Lee.
Yes. But a very um like the palette very very saturated, very not surreal but bordering on it, in that it's just hyper saturated. But yeah, like Dutch angle photography,
Man, yeah,
a lot of
really.
that. And yeah, and a lot of things like this movie opens up with Rosie Perez just ferociously dancing
Yeah,
on
which is sick.
what is on
Yeah,
clearly a stage, and
right.
with like a facade of Brooklyn in the background. And that actually reminds me of several other Spike Lee films that I've seen. So uh this is very much like the DNA of a Spike Lee film. But Black Klansman is something where he takes a more traditional approach to that movie, and I think it works because um, that to me is a more outlandish story, but it's true. So he doesn't want to over accentuate his style and make it seem like a farce, because that was something that actually happened. Um, I have last year for the first time I watched Malcolm X, which I think is really tremendous. But I feel like, and I forget, like the first half hour, first 45 minutes, that movie was just all over the place and making decisions that I would not make.
Yeah.
I
Like
think
what? Give an example.
so. I don't remember specifics, but I just remember it being like a lot of, and this is something that we're going to talk about with
Sure.
Do the Right Thing. There's a lot of vignettes and choices made about telling like the early portion of Malcolm X's life, which I just feel are either unnecessary or too long. And it's like, it's building up a character through several scenes that later in the movie is going to break down and become Malcolm X, the man. But I just felt like it was too much and too vignette and too disparate from the rest of the film. And that's why I don't particularly care for that portion of that movie. I think the second half really picks up and becomes an excellent film, as well as a stunning performance by Denzel Washington. And there's a couple other films that I've seen from Spike Lee where he flip-flops in between this very stylized version that he does, and then there's these very traditionally shot films that he does. And I usually like the more traditionally shot versions,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I struggled with this film.
Okay.
The inciting incident toward the end of this film and how this film proceeds after that, I think is excellent. I think there's a bunch of excellent character development, but I think the first hour of this movie is too many individual vignettes that don't directly tie into the theme of the movie. They are, like you said, building the character of this neighborhood, which then I feel like is not nearly as important as the details tying into the central theme of the second half of this movie, or tying into even doing the right thing. There's just a bunch of weird long segues off of what I think is a very timely, and important message that this movie wants to get across. And I think it kind of gets muddled by this sort of meandering first hour or so. I don't particularly care for that. I think it's the same kind of thing that I had a problem with Black Orpheus, where I just like a script that has more of a focus on a theme or a message, as opposed to something that's just a little bit more feeling out the vibe of this neighborhood and kind of immersing us into these characters. I don't really need all that. You give me a few snapshots and I'll fill in the rest. But this movie is very much a Spike Lee joint, and I don't know if I particularly care for his style when he's going to 10.
I mean, I love that sort of like disjointed, abstract kind of vignette style. I think it was a great way to showcase some of the different actors. Um, we see like Giancarlo Esposito
Who I could not believe that was Giancarlo Esposito.
He used to be fun.
He looks so different now.
Yeah, he used to be fun and shit. He used to have Air Jordans.
Yeah.
So we get to showcase some of these actors and their abilities, which I think is cool. But more than that, I think that the movie attempts to be kind of a docu-fiction. It's like, so traveling around this neighborhood and thinking about the different people that are there and their different dynamics and thinking about them in this long term, I think is really critical. Not for necessarily answering anything, but for giving you all the information you need to um, debate the ending, basically. I'm trying to think about how to give this some like gravity, but because I like these kinds of like arty movies and stuff,
Mhm.
and which is like perfectly fine, and like you like um whatever it is that you like, Waterworld, and that's fair enough.
I didn't like
Uh,
Waterworld.
liked it all. It was all the white actors in Waterworld.
I don't see color. I just see water. And there was so much water in that film, and I loved it.
So, what do you think the title of this movie means? What is "do the right thing"? How does it apply within the movie? How would you interpret it? And everyone's paying attention to see if you're racist. So
It means be
don't.
white. uh no, I mean, I didn't think about this as a thesis statement for the film.
Ooh,
So we're doing this live on cam.
yeah, yeah. So "do the right thing" is a line in the movie
Mm-hmm.
by this guy who's like kind of like an older dude who's just kind of like out on the street drinking beer from a paper bag. But it's kind of like a cryptic message, and kind of like a throwaway if it weren't the title of the movie itself.
Yeah, I mean, again, just doing this on the pod. Doing the right thing can mean, I mean, from one perspective, especially, so we're gonna get into spoilers from here on out.
Yeah, let's do
So
it.
the if you haven't seen it, it's available on Netflix or the Criterion Channel, so you should go check it out.
And it is terrific. And again, it was
It's 100% worth seeing.
100% worth seeing. Ignored by the Cannes Film Festival, so much so that Roger Ebert threatened to boycott it. Didn't, but it was on both Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert's best of the decade list, in addition to their best movie of the year for 1989. It's a
But
great movie.
to be fair, they're both dead. So did
They
Do the Right Thing kill them? No one knows.
It's hard to say.
um, but yeah, so this movie's third act is basically the coming to a head of the African American community that lives in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, versus the owner of, is it Sal's Pizzeria?
Yes.
Yeah. I knew it was something fucking
Who are
stereotypically Italian.
very Italian American.
Yeah,
Yep.
very, very Italian American, who do not live in the neighborhood but own the pizzeria in the neighborhood. And
Right.
Some residents of the community want people of color on the wall of fame inside the restaurant, and
Just all Italians.
it is exclusively Italians, and the owner, Sal, makes no bones about it, is that you have to be Italian to be on his wall of fame.
And then Giancarlo Esposito.
And that's who represents like there's sort of like an aspect of the culture which is saying like, give us representation. You can't just come into our community and not represent our community.
Right.
And
especially if all of the local money is going into the business.
Correct. Yeah. And then and then that money is leaving the community with them when they go home at night. But then there's another aspect of the community which is represented by radio something or other. What was his name?
Samuel L. Jackson.
No. The boombox player.
Radio Raheem.
Thank you. I couldn't remember his name. Radio Raheem represents a different perspective, which was mad, is like Sal and his sons don't respect the culture of the neighborhood that they're in. So it's not only like you don't respect our residents, you also don't respect our culture. You won't let me play my boombox inside. You're not polite to me. You don't say please. You just yell at me like I'm a child. So there's these two aspects of the community feeling like Sal is an outsider, and then Sal comes back and they get into a fight. He destroys the boombox. The cops are called
Yep.
by someone. Cops come.
Now we've already seen these cops a few times, so we already know who these cops are.
Yes. Yeah, all of the characters, which one of the plus sides of the vignette is everything about all of these characters already.
Exactly. So we're ready for them. Yeah.
But then the cops are called. They show up. The more racist of the two cops who have been shown previously in the movie chokes out Radio Raheem
on
screen to death. Kills him, and that starts basically a riot, a protest outside Sal's that becomes violent. And at one point, the character played by Spike Lee himself picks up a trash can and throws it through the window of the place where he works. And then
incites looting and destruction and a fire.
Yes. And that's basically the climax of the film. So
while Sal and his two sons are physically unharmed.
Correct. So back to your question about what is Do the Right Thing. And I think of it as the perspectives of Sal versus the perspective of Spike Lee's character. And in that inciting moment, to me, Do the Right Thing from Sal's perspective is, hey, you're black, you work for me, I'm not the one who choked out Radio Raheem. Do the right thing, step in, calm everyone down. And Spike Lee's character clearly feels that doing the right thing is, no, you may not have choked out Radio Raheem, but you're the reason Radio Raheem was choked out. And so him doing the right thing was removing himself from an establishment that he felt was clearly not supporting his community and not beneficial to his community, in fact, harming his community. And so he decided to destroy it. So I thought my initial perspective on what is Do the Right Thing, is it conflict when it is, like the end of the movie suggests with the two quotes, when it's self-defense, or is doing the right thing passive engagement and nonviolence, like Dr. King's quote at the end of the movie. So that's how I would take it. Again, didn't really think about it before just now, but that is kind of how in my brain I reference the title.
That's interesting. So one of the prevalent interpretations of the title from 1989 was whether or not Spike Lee's character Mookie was right or wrong to throw the trash can into the pizzeria to start the riot. And one of the key elements of the debate, which you hinted at a lot of it, but one of the things that you didn't bring up was that because he throws a trash can into the pizzeria, he focuses the attention of the crowd on the space, not the people, thereby potentially having saved their lives. So there's a community aspect of it. There's like a compassionate aspect of it, but I guess I was sort of trying to approach Do the Right Thing critically as a mantra for the movie, and I was trying to think about it in terms of like aspirational, that it as a point of clarity to move towards or aspire to, and that in some ways the movie moving around all these different characters and their vignettes, trying to understand the dynamics of this neighborhood as being very complex and being also very deep, like going back decades, sort of like was a way to give you sort of the tools you needed to begin exploring what something like Do the Right Thing could possibly mean. But to an extent, I feel like Do the Right Thing is kind of like Rashomon, that it ends, but it doesn't end. That there isn't sort of like the satisfying ending where anybody comes to a point of understanding.
No.
Something just sort of happens and everyone just sort of like reacts to it and then also just kind of like goes about their lives. And you're just sort of like left kind of wondering about it. So I saw Do the Right Thing as being just sort of like this pie in the sky, kind of like not particularly attributed to anybody, but just sort of something aspirational, but at the same time like deeply abstract and opaque.
Yeah, I also this film plays with at several points uh bad people, air quotes bad people doing good things, and air quotes good people doing bad things.
Right.
Um our main character is ostensibly a good guy. We want to root for Spike Lee's character. Um Although Spike Lee is not the greatest actor in the world in this movie, but he does a good enough job where it's not distracting. But there
Right.
are a couple of scenes where it's like, maybe you should have cast a real actor. Um, but Spike is clearly the protagonist of the film.
Yeah.
And but we're routinely given these moments where he is a bad guy. He takes advantage of his employer and takes long lunch breaks, and goes and delivers a pizza, and then just fucks around for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
He's a deadbeat dad by what the movie is saying. He doesn't spend time with his son or his baby mama, Rosie Perez.
Conversely, he also throws out his friend who thought that there should be like
Representation
of a someone black on their kind of like wall of fame.
Yeah.
So he also kind of like undermines his community as well. But at the same time, he knows everybody. He's very charming and he's like,
Mm-hmm.
he's not a negative presence at all.
No. Again, it's a good guy, but
Yeah.
we're shown bad
He's
things.
imperfect.
And
Yeah.
we're shown bad guys doing good things. Like
Right.
Sal is a racist. He's
Yes.
not as racist as John Turturro is in this film, his son.
Yes.
But he
Also,
is,
who you may know from The Big Lebowski.
yeah, everything. He's the Jesus. He is also shown as being good, but like he treats the mayor, this homeless, or I guess he has a home, this drunk in the neighborhood
Yeah.
who goes by the name Mayor. He treats Mayor excellently.
Yes.
Way better than his son wants him to, and way better than any other person in the black community in Brooklyn treats him. He treats Mayor with respect and kindness and helps him out when he doesn't have to. So we're shown these dualities for characters on both sides of this. And I think that's important in this film because it's saying like doing the right thing is not something everybody does at
Right.
all times.
Right.
And so I think that's a very interesting aspect of this film where people aren't wholly good and wholly bad. There's people who are more bad than good, and there's people who are more good than bad. Being racist is way worse than taking a long lunch. Like
Yes.
they're not equal.
Right.
But they
yes.
show that not. One of the things that I like about that is they show the actuality of racist people. If you've ever met someone in your life, whether it's an uncle or maybe even an uncle, they're just someone who
Insight into Tim's life.
It's just usually an uncle. For me, it's been coworkers and uncles and friends of friends who you enjoy, and then they say a thing that is so unbelievable to you where you're just like stunned into silence that you
Right.
can't believe someone who you enjoy would say something like that, something so bigoted or short-sighted or racist. But like we've all experienced that actuality of life of someone who you enjoy who also said something reprehensible. And this movie captures that, where it's like, you can't just put everybody in a box of a good guy and a bad guy. Like, everybody is kind of shitty sometimes, and it's just, are you a good guy more than you're kind of shitty, or are you kind of shitty more than you're a good guy? Like, Sal comes off through most of this movie as a better guy than he is a shitty guy, but his son comes off as a super shitty guy all the time.
And yeah, and to Spike Lee's credit, for the movie, we can understand how Sal's children are a product of his own behavior.
Absolutely. And they're very different and represent two different sides of Sal. The side of Sal that really wants to fuck his employee's sister is probably where the other son comes from. And that guy's in a bunch of stuff too. I don't know what that actor's name was, but as soon as he was on screen, I was like, I've seen him in 50 things.
Yeah, the whole cast became Martin Lawrence was in there, just kind of like
Yeah, playing a simpleton.
Yeah.
Yeah, Martin Lawrence also didn't realize what type of film he was in.
Right. He was dehydrated.
He was something. But yeah, like I do like that the film plays with this sort of duality of people. But I just, one of the areas where that failed me though is that Spike has never had, or let's say Spike at this time had never had a conversation with a racist, a white racist, because when he has a conversation with a super racist son, the super racist son's reasons for being racist are incomprehensible, and not, the logic doesn't make sense. There is no logic behind it.
Yeah, it's weirdly about like masculinity and kind of those sorts of things.
Yeah, which is something you might write if you're not a white racist guy.
Right.
Trying to understand why white racist people will be fans of like famous black people. But that to me felt like, yeah, like you don't get it. You've never had an uncomfortable conversation with these people where, yeah, it's convoluted and it makes no sense if you think about it for a second. But they have, it's like QAnon. They have the rationale where they fill in a lie or a half-truth and that connects a dot for them. And it's like, oh, well, they're bad because of this.
Right.
Yeah, so like I felt like that was a little bit of a problem with dealing with the duality, because Spike clearly wanted to say, like, even someone this far gone still thinks Michael Jordan is awesome, thinks Prince is fucking cool as hell.
Right.
And appreciates the pinnacle of black culture, but then diminishes every other aspect of it. And while that's true, I felt like he didn't quite hit on that point in an accurate and truthful way, because there's no way he can understand that perspective.
Right.
I did think this film also a little bit, it's beautifully shot in the way that it's clearly Spike doing exactly what he wanted to do. One of my favorite shots is when Spike walks up to Radio Raheem in the street, and then the camera pivots to Spike's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when he does the love-hate in the wide-angle fish lens, and it's just directly into camera talking. And then the camera backs off again, and Spike walks back into frame, so you don't realize that he was never not there. I thought that was like really excellent. But there were just some times where there was just like a weird Dutch angle on something, and that was all I could focus on. And I felt like that was distracting.
The Dutch angles, I think because they were used very thematically and very judiciously, they did feel like tension in a way that I think doesn't normally happen because they just get used all the time. Like the Dutch angles were very dramatic in this movie. But I think you're right. There were some really creative, like really thoughtful. There's some really thoughtful choreography and some well composed shots. I think like the final thing that I think is really important to harp on for this. And like one of the things that is deeply devastating about this movie, obviously, is that the like cultural politics and the racial politics of a movie from 1939, which is 32 years ago.
1989. You said 39.
I know I said 89. Didn't I say 89?
You said 39.
It remains like deeply relevant.
Yes.
And
disappointingly relevant.
Not just that we're having some of the same debates, but like that the actual events within the film are things that are present realities that we're all deeply familiar with.
Yeah, I mean it's so close to exactly what happened with George Floyd that it was almost disturbing, and it was deeply depressing. Is like, again, this is half a decade before anyone knew the name Rodney King, and we get to watch a depiction of exactly what happens basically to George Floyd last year. And the tragedy is clearly that in 30 years, it went from this was a thing that Black people knew about to this is a thing that everybody knew about,
right,
to this is a thing that happens and will prosecute the cops afterwards. And that's not nearly enough progress to make this film not deeply saddening, because what Spike is depicting here, and you know, you spoke about the scene where they name other people's names who've been killed by the cops,
right,
who are footnotes in history because they're not Rodney King, they're not George Floyd, they're not Breonna Taylor. Their names are sadly lost to time because there's new names on that list.
Right.
And actually that moment reminded me a lot of the David Byrne special that was on HBO Max, where at one point he covers a protest song, I believe originally written by Janelle Monáe.
Mm.
And all he does throughout the song is basically there's a chorus and then there's just naming names of people who have been killed at the hands of the police. And Spike Lee directed that special. And the special goes from being recorded as an on-stage performance on Broadway to people on a soundstage holding up names and family members being filmed. And it's very powerful in that special. And seeing that 30 years on, you feel the struggle. Like that, seeing this movie makes that scene in that, you know, recording of a Broadway performance much more poignant, because Spike is 30 years later still having to hold up these names and still having to say them out loud.
Right.
Because the same thing that he was talking about in 1989 was still happening in 2019. And it's just
devastating.
Yeah.
Disheartening.
Yeah, it just makes you feel like any progress you feel like you've made in the last year, you know, since George Floyd galvanized a lot of this nation against these types of extrajudicial fucking murders.
Right.
It just makes it feel like it's been happening, and unless we do something drastic, it's just going to continue to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's brutal. But like entirely the nice thing about a movie like this too, obviously, is that like it offers a degree of wisdom that we couldn't have anticipated for the present. There's like a lot to be sort of like learned and appreciated from experiencing this movie.
Yeah, I think talking it out, I feel a little bit better about this movie. I was just kind of, again, like the vignette thing just wasn't working for me, and that's just
I love vignettes.
That's just it's a personal taste on movies, so there's no right or wrong. It just doesn't work for me. but the second half of this film, especially today, is just very disturbingly relevant, is how I'll say that. And that was arresting, and that brought me back into the film. And I enjoyed this film, and I would recommend anyone to watch it because it's prime Spike Lee.
Yep.
There are some excellent performances. There's actors you know and love all over the place, including Samuel L. Jackson playing just like a bit role as a radio host. Sort of, I don't know. I guess he's the chorus of the film.
Yeah, but he's great. He yells at everybody. It seems
does.
like it feels very Samuel Jackson. He's very capable of yelling at everyone.
Yeah. But yeah, for me, I think now that I've discussed it a little bit with you, I've taken more away from the film that I would have if I had just watched it on my own, turn it off, and not thought about it a little bit more. But yeah, it was definitely good. It's not great. I've in my opinion, I've seen Spike do better stuff with Malcolm X and some other films, but definitely a film that's worth a spin if you're considering it. All right, Mike, why don't we take a quick little break here, and we'll be right back with more. Next week on Subject to Blackout. As is our wont, Mike and I have decided to pivot a little bit, and instead of reviewing another movie, Mike and I are going to watch the first 2 episodes of the new Apple TV Plus series, Foundation. Based on the science fiction series by the legendary science fiction author Isaac Asimov, Apple TV Plus's Foundation centers on the fall of a pan-galactic empire and one man's efforts to hasten the Dark Age with sociological mathematics, called psychohistory, predicts. This book series spans thousands of years, and it appears as though Apple TV Plus and creator David S. Goyer have an ambitious plan to grapple with the gigantic storyline Asimov set forth for the showrunners. Having seen the first 2 episodes in stunning 4K on my OLED TV, I can guarantee you that Apple has thrown all of the money at this endeavor. Mike is a devoted fan of the book series, and while I have not read the books, I'm extremely interested in this breathtaking reimagining of this seminal sci-fi epic. Will it live up to the hype? Watch along on Apple TV Plus and find out with us next week when we talk about the first 2 episodes of Foundation. All right, well, that was our discussion on the 1989 film Spike Lee joint, Do the Right Thing. Mike, has there been anything else that you have been consuming pop culturally this weekend?
You know what I have? I've really dug in. I watched a couple episodes of Star Wars Visions.
Okay.
Yo, it's sick as fuck.
What is Star Wars
wicked
Visions?
sick.
For someone who doesn't know.
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think it's kind of like the Animatrix. They're like, what if like a bunch of Japanese animators just like go fucking wild on the franchise? So because Star Wars is sort of inspired by like Hidden Fortress and a bunch of other Kurosawa movies. Basically, a bunch of like Japanese animators went and just like Kurosawa the hell out of different elements of the Star Wars franchise. So there's like a bunch of like samurai Jedi kind of like hacking at each other. It's like sick as fuck. Totally sick. I'm gonna watch the rest of it. It's one of the rare things on Disney Plus where all the episodes come out at once because they're all like 10, 12 minutes long. Kind of like Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix. If you watch that,
I saw that. I never watched it.
Loved Love, Death, and Robots. But yeah, Star Wars Visions, totally wicked. What the hell else did I do? I watched something. God, it couldn't have been that meaningful, I guess. I watched that Nintendo Direct yesterday. Gonna get some more Animal Crossing shit. Psyched for that.
Is it gonna be just like DLC or something?
I don't know. They're gonna do a whole announcement, but check this shit out. So Nintendo is going to so their streaming service allows you to do cloud saves, and then you get access to a bunch of Nintendo and Super Nintendo games. But if you pay more money, now you can also access Nintendo 64 games, and if you pay $50, you can get your own wireless but still hopefully janky ass Nintendo 64 controller to play everything. Wow. And I will be throwing money at that shit because I'll just make more money. I don't give a fuck. I'm gonna get a Nintendo 64 controller. I don't give a shit. So that's what I'm psyched about. So Star Wars Visions and hopefully playing Wave Race 64.
That game sucked.
A game sucked in the best way. It sucks like bowling sucks. Like there's like one person that's good at it and like 100 people who just like fucking suck at it.
See, I like bowling because I'm one of the people who's good at it. So
No. So yeah, that was me. What did you do?
So I wrapped up my rewatch of 30 Rock recently, and
Oh yeah.
it was mostly background watching, so I don't have anything in depth to say about the series, but it's a funny show. And having not seen a lot of the episodes in like many years, a lot of the jokes that like kind of come out of left field were hitting hard.
Sure.
So still very funny show. The other thing I was watching this past week was season 2 of the FX/Hulu show Dave. Have you ever heard of the show Dave?
I know you've mentioned it. I have not seen it.
So Dave is about Lil Dicky, who is like a comedian rapper. I mean, his name is Lil Dicky. But it's basically the fictionalized version of his life where he and like his friend, well, mostly just him, like sort of discovers this talent he has for rapping and comedy. But then he realizes at some point, at least in the show, that he feels, despite the fact that he's funny, he really thinks he's actually a very good rapper. And it's sort of dealing with that duality of like, I deal with jokes because that's how like I deal with life.
Yep.
But also, like he wants people to respect the fact that he's actually quite good at what he does, and
sure,
he's not doing this as a joke. He just makes jokes while doing it.
Sure.
And the difference therein. And season 1 I thought was surprisingly good. Like I kind of watched the show because there was talk about like, hey, this shit's actually a really good show. And season 1 I found funny, and he shows off his prowess as a wordsmith in it a few times. And it also kind of makes this point where it's like, just because someone is being humorous doesn't mean they're not serious and committed to something. And I thought that was a very interesting take, in the frustrations of not being taken seriously in an art form because you're being funny.
Sure.
As someone who loves stand-up comedy and loves worships stand-ups, I found that a poignant take on it, is just because you're funny doesn't mean it's not art. Season 2 kind of just mostly deals with his insecurities and problems, and it felt significantly less funny, and it felt significantly more kind of up its own ass. It was still very well done.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of like, there's these moments where it's like, yeah, that feels super true to life. That feels like something someone I would know would, Mike would have done that or whatever. But it just, I feel like it lost the plot a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But it's if you like season 1, season 2 is, to call it a sophomore slump is generous. It's a little bit worse, but still pretty darn good. So I watched that mostly this past week.
I mean, this sounds interesting to me because I like things that are funny and art at the same time, which is why I like Dane Cook.
I mean, a true Monet of comedy.
Do you
impressionistic?
Who shit on the coats? Someone shit on the coats.
I mean, that
Remember that?
That was his commentary, like Spike Lee's commentary on racist police.
But what did he mean?
The police shit on the coats.
Shit on the coats, yes.
The police did.
Systemic violence.
Unchecked power held by the government shit on the coats.
Who's the coats?
The coats?
We're both coats. We're all coats. All
the
of
coats
us.
are white supremacy, really, when you think about it.
Those are hoods.
Yeah. You got to appreciate Dane Cook.
Hmm.
True legend. All right, Mike. Well, I think that does it for this week's Subject to Blackout. For those of you listening along, you can head on over to subjecttoblackout.com to reach out to us, or you can find all of our links to our socials, including Instagram, Patreon, Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube on the website. Also, feel free to rate, review, and subscribe. And lastly, you can follow Mike on Instagram and Twitter at Name Taken Podcast. Mike, thanks for joining me.
Cheers, Tim.